We welcome basic questions and more sophisticated questions, but I hope we'll spend the next 45 minutes taking questions. There are no questions that are bad. It's hard for them to answer very personal questions, so if you could broaden out your question because they don't know your medical history, that would be great. And who would like to? Sophie will be on the other side, so I don't have to walk back and forth all the whole time. Who would like to start with a question?
I think a quick question. How does secondary amyloidosis impact your treatment decisions?
Maybe I can take a first stab just to break the ice. So for those of you who don't know, amyloidosis is a word we use to describe abnormal protein deposits in the body. And the one that we see with myeloma or related conditions is called light chain amyloidosis. So it's very, very important for your doctors to know that, because I think we have to be thinking about different ways about targets for what is good treatment, and also to watch out for certain toxicities of the treatment. So as just one example of several, if you use dexamethasone, patients who have amyloidosis have, in general, a higher propensity to do fluid retention. So we'll tend to go a little bit lower those doses. And so there's a whole series of things that come to mind. Even stem cell transplant is a little bit more risky when you have light chain amyloidosis. So there's all sorts of things that come together in this.
Well, I have a statement to make first, and then I'd have one question up there. Now, I don't know all three of the other doctors up there, but in 2005 of this year, my wife and I came from Washington, D.C. to Arizona. And the reason that we came to the Mayo Hospital out here, because there was a young doctor at that time, and his name was Fonseca, and he was running a clinical trial out here on multiple myeloma, and a lot of people didn't know what the hell it was. They didn't have any black people in it, so I figured we'd come out here and integrate this damn thing. And I brought my wife out here, and 47 years, and I told her we were going to Arizona. She said, "Why the hell are we going to Arizona? It's hot out there." I said, "Well, we're going out there because they don't have no black people in the damn clinical trial." And Walter Reed, Army Hospital, told us to go out there and work with this guy by the name of Fonseca, he was just a normal medical doctor. But he wasn't, he had a hematology oncology like he is now. Now, he took about 3 years, put my wife in remission, and she's been in remission ever since. But she had a spike. I guess you call it a lapse. I'm not ever watching your chart. And he was down in Florida giving another speech and conference down there, some great people in Florida. And another doctor at Mayo noticed a spike, called him on the phone, and then he put my wife in the chemotherapy on the phone. And I, as a caregiver, I see you smiling over there because she's another doctor over there too. This is what they do when they have a team that's working together. Now, I think all of us need to give you, Dr. Fonseca, to lead this, a round of applause for being so insightful and telling us to do new therapies. That CAR-T, that's the new good stuff, isn't it? Yeah, new therapies out there, and telling us the truth, because you could come here and get the truth. It may not sound good, and you may not like it, but it's going to be true, and he's going to tell you how to get yourself together. So thank you very much. Let me give you a round of applause.
Thank you very much. So very, very honored. Thank you.
Amazing. Go ahead.
No. I would just express my gratitude, and as I tell patients, thank you for your trust as well too. It's a big deal, and we have a big responsibility, and we'll walk together to get to the right place. So thank you.
And can I make a follow-up comment, because what you said is really, really important. We don't know what drugs work in what populations unless patients join clinical trials. So, for example, we have a Black Myeloma Health Initiative to not only just educate, but to also teach about this opportunity. Do you want to speak to any of that in all the health equity work that you're trying to do and get the right treatment to the right patient at the right time? Genetically speaking, there might be some difference in genetics. So do you want to speak to that as a group?
I can start. So for us, we're at our hospital. This is something really important to us, especially for myeloma, where we do see Black people are more likely to get myeloma compared to any other race or ethnicity. And so for clinical trials, we actually every week look at everybody we've enrolled, and we look at ethnicity and race. And thankfully, we have actually gotten 21% Black patients onto all our different trials. But I think we need to see that, right? When we're all busy in clinic and making sure we're talking to everybody, that's one aspect on our side, that we're offering it to everybody. The other aspect is making sure our patients are coming to us with questions if they don't understand something, and making sure that we're able to spend that time. So for me, I have an entire team, as you just said, not just doctors, but our nurse practitioners, our research folks, our nurses. Each person has a role in being able to explain the different processes of clinical trials or even just new therapies. So once you get to us, then those are the things we can do. But the other aspect is access of patients even being able to get to the places that have these therapies, right? So there's a lot of work going into that as well. How do we get resources for patients who can't afford to fly to Houston or to Arizona or to special places when they live in smaller towns? So there's a lot of work, and coming back to the genetics piece, it's really important that even though risk is higher for myeloma, outcomes are actually better in our Black patients for the most part. So if you look at all the data in the last 10, 20 years, our Black patients who get transplant actually do way better than any other ethnicity or race, yet they're the least likely to get it, right? Why is that? Again, all these little pieces of access. So outcomes are actually better when patients get the treatments that we have for them. In a CAR-T side of things, we've noticed that patients have different toxicities potentially based on their race or ethnicity. So are there ways that we can decrease some of those toxicities for certain patients? And I think clinical trials, one other thing is that some of our what we call normal for white blood cell or kidney function is not the same for everybody, right? For instance, Mediterranean and African patients originally from there, their white counts are lower in general. And all of a sudden you're not eligible for a clinical trial just because of that not being normal. So again, we're working with our, the FDA as well as the sponsors that run these trials to make sure we're more inclusive so that we can have patients actually be able to get on.
Just going to add very quickly before my other colleagues comment, I wish I could have recorded your comments for our cancer center director, because we're always looking forward at making sure we satisfy that requirement, which is an essential one to make sure our clinical trials represent all the communities. I say there's a patient who flew here just so that we could have more Blacks in the clinical trial. So thank you for doing that as well too.
I don't have much to add. I think you've said it nicely. I mean, I think some examples, maybe people are familiar with this. I think we've seen through some trials that African-American patients are more likely to have peripheral neuropathy related to Velcade use. Why? We don't really understand that. But similar to what we've seen is there's just lots of interest to say, we in San Diego, we have an enormous Hispanic population, and they have trouble getting access. And whether it's language barriers, even putting people on clinical trials, trying to get consent forms that are translated can be very challenging sometimes. So we have a lot of work to do to try and make sure everyone has access to it. But we have a lot of interest in trying to understand why drugs are metabolized differently or why it may work better with one person than another person. So thank you for participating in these trials and asking about it. And I think just on the topic of clinical trials, I could say this out loud. I think there is still this notion that clinical trials is this guinea pig placebo thing. And it doesn't exist that way anymore. Placebos don't happen anymore. There's the concept of clinical trials in 2023 is oftentimes either saying, this is a new drug, everyone's gonna get this new drug and let's see how it works, which is how CAR-Ts and our bispecifics come to life and get approvals. But there are trials that are comparing one thing to another thing, and that other thing is no longer a sugar pill, right? There's this misconception that still exists. So nowadays it is what we know works versus what we think may work just as well, if not better. So when you're talking about clinical trials, please know that it benefits you. It's not all altruism. You are helping other people, yes, but these are things we think can be beneficial to you as well.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I think everybody summed it up pretty nicely. And I think part of it is our responsibility that patients should trust the medical system. Within certain communities, I think there have been rightly historical reasons why there has been a little bit of distrust regarding clinical trials and about the medical infrastructure. So I think building that trust within communities is very important. And even having certain benchmarks that you need to have a minimum number of patients from different ethnicities and representation in clinical trials being made as one of the important factors when designing those trials, I think will also go a long way in trying to have more people kind of participate from different ethnic backgrounds in our studies.
And just a comment, like we are working with the Mayo Clinic now on our Spanish. Sophie, where did she go? She's working with the Mayo Clinic right now and reaching out to UCSD to see if we can offer Spanish, because we have an enormous number of staff members who speak Spanish. So facilitate support groups so we, as a foundation, we have that as a priority as well. Okay, next question.
Yes, can you comment on the cost of the two new concepts compared to what's the older one, steroid, or the standard type of administration?
So just maybe it's the CAR T cells and the bispecifics and their cost. Thank you. No, I think that's a very important question. We want to know, of course, that things that are done are beneficial. And I say, and I will tell my patients at the bedside. So when I'm with you in the room, the only thing that matters with regards to cost to me is whether you can afford it because of the copays. How much they cost at large, it's an important question, but it's not one that belongs or should belong in front of that patient-physician interaction. Because I think my role, and I think it's true for all doctors, is to find for you whatever is the best available. And then, let's try to get us to do that. Now, that comes with challenges. We realize that, of course, sometimes, particularly with copays, so what we call affordability, that becomes the biggest factor to make sure that patients have the ability to have the funds to do that. Now, we work closely with foundations and other third parties. So in the majority of patients, I would say we're able to find a way so they can get their medications. It's very rare that we don't do that. And when I hear those stories, oftentimes it's, well, let's try again. We'll see if we can find something else we can do. Now, if I extricate myself from that situation, I think of it from a societal perspective. Of course, we want to make sure that we get the bang for our buck, that these are reasonable things that make sense. I'm sure many of you have heard we pay a lot more here than for medications and other interventions in the rest of the world. But also the reality, most of them start here and most of them are developed and the innovation occurs here in the United States. So it's kind of a trade-off of that versus having earlier access for a lot of these things. And people have to do analysis too as well of, okay, what happens with other healthcare cost utilization? So, we've done some studies, I've myself published on that, to say that sometimes you do something that is costly at the unit level, but when you look at everything you spend on healthcare, it's cheaper. So one example is maintenance treatment. We did a study on this and we showed that if you're in maintenance, you pay more for the pills, for the maintenance, but you actually end up spending less in total because you don't get hospitalization, surgeries, blood transfusions, and all those things. So it's really important. This is a somewhat new field, but we have to work with people that are specialists in this field, the economists that work on this, just so we can get a gauge of what that means with dollars. It's an important question from the society side. But I always tell the fellows, when you're in the bedside, you don't go as like, well, I wish I could give you this treatment, but it seems expensive. Let's go with this one. It's a little bit cheaper. No, if it's not that good. I don't know if my colleagues.
I think the only other thing I'd say is as if you don't have enough anxiety, right, to think about your diagnosis and then the treatments and side effects and how you feel and how your caregiver is going to help and what this means for your job to add the kind of wallet toxicity that it does. But I think one of the things that I get asked a lot, and I confess that I make some assumptions, is that patients ask to say, well, is this covered? Is my insurance going to cover this? And I think the answer needs to be dived down a little bit neater, like you're talking about coverage for these FDA approvals. Your insurance company, in theory, cannot deny them. They are approved, they are covered. What your requirement will be based on what your insurance company is in terms of, what your copay is or what your deductible is or what those words mean. But CAR T is approved by the FDA, and therefore your insurance company is required, to cover it. It's just what percentage of that you would need to pay for that, and that is what varies.
I mean, you say that I haven't reached Medicare, but in 3 years, that's my concern, because I took an early retirement in September, and I can keep my good, we probably should. But I'm afraid Mayo Clinic doesn't take any advantage plans, except one on his teacher retirement. I'm like, oh, shoot, maybe in 3 years when I move to that, I'll have coverage, because that's my concern too. It's like when you go to these other places, how does Medicare cover it? Or is that when you get grants and help fund those extra?
For most of the most expensive thing is Medicare Part B. So Medicare Part D, as you know, is the oral but actually, and as we were discussing, Mayo will take standard Medicare. It's just, and I think maybe it's a conversation, for another day, another topic. But of course, with Medicare Advantage plans come some benefits, but some limitations as well too. So the challenge being a not-for-profit organization, everything that comes out as margin is reinvested in research and education. But it was very challenging to work with the private companies that administer the Medicare Advantage plan. So we have to tell patients that get letters out. We do take Medicare, but it has to be standard Medicare. And we can see patients with Advantage plans under an exception, but they have to go through a whole process. It's a more difficult thing.
Hi there. With regard to CAR T therapy, some patients, even while in remission or after being on nothing, they have a low lymphocyte count, even though the rest of their white blood cells look okay. Is there a minimum number or percentage of lymphocytes to be eligible for CAR T therapy?
That's a great question. So technically, companies tell us a number like 0.2 or 0.3, which is really low. So most normal, again, normal can be different for different people, but most normal is like 0.8 to 1.1, 1.2 or higher. So the higher it is, we like that, but that doesn't mean qualitatively that one way or the other. So that what we call the absolute lymphocyte count, there's like a 0.2, 0.3 that people really say we should try to do for. But again, it's just, I wish we had a test that qualitatively told me to, because I've had patients that were right at that borderline or even lower that made CAR Ts and did well, and then I've had patients that were at 1 and we couldn't manufacture, right? So, and that's rare, that's on the other ends of the bell curve, but it's not, the counts themselves are worthwhile, at least to have a minimum. And we do see it when people are off therapy. Sometimes we'll see them come up, again, depending on where you are on your treatment, but it's not the end-all be-all.
I just have a question on bispecifics. Is there anything in the pipeline that will come in the form of a pill so we're not being chained to the pump with IVs all the time? It seems like, I was so happy when my husband was on Pomalyst and Dex because we could travel. Now it's like always a hassle because you have to be here all the time. So I'm just wondering, do you guys have any input to a drug company on formulating a pill so people don't have to come in all the time?
I'm going to give you really bad news for that. Bispecifics, like antibodies that are what we call large molecules, and in fact, they're called biologicals. And that means when you look at the molecular structure, they're huge. Things like that don't get absorbed through our gut. So immediately they get digested by the acids in the stomach and then the enzymes we have. So I don't think we'll ever be able to. Now, you should never say ever, because maybe there's technology 5 years from now that there's a little nano capsule that goes in and then just injects it into the wall of the gut. Maybe that's a good idea. I don't know. It's something that could work. But for now, small molecules can be taken as pills, and large molecules have to be injected. Good news, most of them are subcutaneous. Maybe there's going to be ways of provision of this at home. I used to joke that daratumumab subcutaneous could be a drive-through drug that you put your arm out and get it out, and then you can keep driving. That would be good, huh? But not in the near future.
At least not bispecifics. I think there are quite a few other new small molecules that are coming to market that are kind of touted as next generation Pomalyst and things like that you're talking about. So if not bispecifics and if not figuring out how to administer outside at home to make it more convenient, there are things in the pipeline that are different drug classes that are coming that are pill form.
I'll give you another quick comment. For a few years ago, the best drugs were Revlimid and Pomalyst because they're oral and no one has to be next to a treatment center. So they were kind of our favorites. And nowadays, people are complaining more about them because they tolerate some of the treatments even better, some of the newer ones. And so now it's more noticeable that people complain about the fatigue. As you know, diarrhea can happen as well too. So that's just the process of evolution. Like some patients that I have had on venetoclax, now they go, yeah, I would never go back to Pomalyst. It was so good with, and that's just the process of how things continue to get better.
And hopefully, like Dr. Costello was mentioning, that with wider spacing between the bispecific antibodies, so hopefully it won't be as much of a hassle, going in every week or every 2 weeks. Hopefully, we can have even a wider interval, 4-week or Q8 week dosing of the bispecific. So that will help, and that might be better because then you're not committed to taking a pill every day. You just come in, take a shot, and you're good for like a month or so.
I have a question that sort of dovetails into this last one, and it's regarding the treatments. So the sort of the new kids on the block now are CAR T and bispecifics. What do you know, or what can you say about what's beyond that? Are there some treatments out there that that we don't know about? I mean, obviously there are, but
So yeah, I think one is how do we make those better? So there's lots, again, new ways to make T cells better or bispecifics better, different antigens, but there's also a whole bunch of other medications, targeted medicines, other immune therapies. So I think Dr. Costello kind of mentioned what's after Pomalyst, so something called cell mods. So there's those are in later line trials, and hopefully eventually we'll get those as standard of care. There's new immune therapies, something that at MD Anderson, Dr. Alexanian started myeloma there a long, long time ago, and he had patients he would put on something called interferon. This was like 30 years ago, and I've had some of those patients, but now we've learned how to, so it's a drug called modakafusp that's being tested, and targeting the myeloma cells with interferon, which some of those studies look really interesting. So there's a lot. So when we talk about phase 2, 3 studies, those are the ones that get drugs approved. And then when we compare them, but now we have a lot of phase 1 studies that are looking at all these, and in cell therapy, using different cells. So instead of T cells, can we use NK cells? Can we use some of those other lymphocytes? Can we use macrophages? So there's a lot of different levels of where those new drugs might be coming in that people are looking at.
And how can we use some of the things we have now? We've got bispecifics, we have CAR Ts that we just know work by themselves. How can we improve upon them in ways by combining them together? What if we took a couple different bispecifics and put them together at the same time? Or what if we combine it with daratumumab as an example? So taking some of our old usual suspects and combining with the new things may improve upon them as well.
I have a question. We were talking about traveling, and we travel, but I have my oncologists in every scattered all over, so they follow me, or I follow, when I travel. If you're into treatment that you have to have through the intravenous or IV, is there a reason you couldn't see a doctor, an oncologist in another town and receive that treatment if you're on the road?
It's possible, absolutely. And this may be a little state dependent, but when you get it received at one place, you have to have insurance authorization to receive it there. And then as soon as you want to get it in another place, you have to transfer that insurance authorization to them and make sure you have established a care with an oncologist there. So yes, like I have a lot of people who winter in San Diego, and so I see them for 6 months of the year, and then they go back to wherever they came from for the other 6 months of the year, and it works. It's probably a little more challenging to do it month by month that way, but
it's usually longer, but that's one reason I went with straight Medicare, the red, white, and blue card, because the Medicare Advantage plan, like you said, does not always follow you. So, but I just wanted to clarify, because I know you can travel, but you need to make sure your insurance is going to cover it. So, thank you.
My question, I have a question. it seems like today everywhere you turn is AI, AI. So how does AI pertain, or the pros and cons of AI as it pertains to oncology? And
I'm sorry, by the way, this cough, I have a chronic cough, so it's just from speaking so much. Try to be quiet. Actually, AI is super exciting. I mean, we're really just seeing the beginning. Here at Mayo, we actually are using AI already for some of the things we do. So one of the most interesting things we do is we can take the electrocardiograms and see by AI if you have amyloidosis. And it's a tool that actually works pretty well. It's just a screening tool. It's not diagnostic. But then like that, we'll see it in many, many other ways. Can you detect myeloma earlier if you're like a general practitioner? Or can you detect amyloidosis earlier? So I don't know. I'll step out for a second.
Okay, another question that she had was, can you talk about CAR T availability? What are the companies or other places doing about making CAR T more accessible?
Sure. This is the biggest headache of my life. This is why I almost quit 20 times. No, I'm still here. So I think the two companies right now, right, that are standard of care are BMS with ide-cel and Janssen with cilta-cel. I will say that initially with both, when they both came out, really hard to get either of them. And this CAR T wait list, all those things that we were seeing was because we just didn't have enough slots. It is much better now, but still not perfect. And really what I'm thinking about is when it becomes approved in second or third line, there's gonna be a lot more patients that need it. So how are we gonna do this, right? So one of it's the lab's ability, like the company's ability to make them, but the other is also our institution's ability to treat all these patients, right? Especially when it's, like I said, it takes a lot of resources to do this. So I will say ide-cel, for instance, and since June, all of a sudden now we have all these slots. So I see a patient, we get insurance clearance, in 2 weeks I have a slot I can give them. So there's definitely certain patients that I prefer ide-cel for. We don't have as much data yet for everything, so that's what we're working on, and hopefully by next year I'll have more publications on this. But we know that patients with renal failure or certain comorbidities, my patients who are in their 80s have done really well with ide-cel and had great responses without the toxicity. So those are my patients I really try to get on as quickly as possible. Or any of my patients with high-risk disease, and I need their cells fast. I can get them through maybe 4 weeks, but I can't wait for 6 to 8 weeks or potential manufacturing issue. Then that's when I've been using ide-cel, because again, they've had a year longer to get everything together. Cilta-cel, amazing drug as well. I mean, we've seen some the best responses in those trials, but they have had 1 year less to develop everything. So, it still I only get 2 or 3 slots a month. They have more available in case there's others left that we can then try to get. It then becomes an institution issue. So my institution, I don't have enough people that can constantly look for slots and do all these things while they're taking, care of all the other stuff too. So I'm hoping that one day that will become the same way that I see a patient. This is what happens for lymphoma. We see a patient, we say, yep, CAR T is the right thing for you, we get insurance approval, and usually we get a slot in 2 weeks. So I'm hoping that once that happens, then the access really won't be as big of an issue. But I think the other big thing is if we can get these cells in a week or 2 weeks, when my patients don't have to worry about their myeloma worsening or getting an infection during that time, we really, there's a lot of things that can happen in that time before the cells come back, that we really want to make sure that you're protected in every way possible. So again, there's some companies trying to make them within 2 days. You can make the cells and give them right away and let them actually mature in your body, for instance. So that's one of the studies that's been presented. There's another one that's working with a company in the lymphoma side that's able to get it to you the fastest. So hopefully they'll know the logistics a little bit better, and maybe when that gets approved, that will really help with the logistical side of things. So remember, these cells, biologics, FDA, it has to be clearance. And so you have all these rules about the quality of the cells when they're made that they have to check through before they can come to you. And if any of those are off, all of a sudden you're not allowed to get it just the regular way. You have to get it a special way on a trial, which then prolongs it a little bit more. So again, there's a lot of different pieces we're working on to make sure more and more patients, even if they get their cells made, can then get them as well.
to give the perspective of someone who's not at MD Anderson and has access to everything, a couple of things that we do is I know who the centers are that are around me. I have CAR T cells, but if I don't have slots available, I know my colleagues in local regional areas who also deliver them. So I connect with them. Hey, do you have a slot? Or hey, do you have a slot? And I sometimes encourage my patients to just go meet that doctor, just so that you're on their list, just so that they can know you, so that as soon as we decide you're ready, they can say, oh, yeah, we know him, get him in here, we'll get everything organized. And a practical thing and I don't know if that was the point of your question, kind of practical stuff, is sometimes when you have to travel to go to CAR T, and I know this is true on the lymphoma side, there's stipends that sometimes the companies will offer to help cover local accommodations or things like that, because it can be quite a burden to travel to a new place, stay there for the time period that's required after you've gone through the entire legwork of finding a CAR T slot.
Okay, other questions?
I want to thank you so much for being here, but I'd love if you could all share what brought you or what drew you to multiple myeloma. As you know, you could have been a pediatrician or a dermatologist. So what is it about this drug or this disease that really drew you to making us better? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. To be honest, it's not just a decision that you make, you wake up one day and decide that I want to be a myeloma doctor. So, these are experiences you go through when you're in training, when you're in med school, you're in residency. You see those patients with myeloma. I've had some people in my family who have dealt with the disease. So these kind of all are, events which kind of build up and then push you in one direction that you want to focus on myeloma. And I think just how dynamic the field has been, with all these new treatments and with all these new drugs which have become available and improving outcomes for a patient. So that's been the primary reason why I decided that I wanted to focus on myeloma.
It's true. Sometimes the stars align in a way you never really intended. I remember in my medical training crossing oncology directly off the list. I was not going to be for me. I was a phlebotomist, and it was in a hematology oncology office, and I couldn't. It was so personally overwhelming for me to hear the stories of what you all go through, and I just didn't see a future for me to do that. And then the stars aligned, and I just kept getting assigned to all the oncology services. And then the boss offered a job and said, I really need someone to build myeloma at our place. And in the end, it turned out to fulfill so much of what was so gratifying for me in medicine, is to the scientific component of it, which is just mind-blowing every single day. Myeloma moves so fast, but offers such a wonderful opportunity in modern myeloma to have very longitudinal relationships with people that have seen every child be born, and we talk about our kids, my kids, and we talk about, in between our appointments. And so the relationships that you can develop with our patients, let alone the scientific awe of it all, filled my buckets.
That's fascinating. I'll tell you my story. First of all, I've changed career choices many times. So I wanted to be an actuary when I was in high school. When I decided to be a doctor, I wanted to be a plastic surgeon, which is a terrible idea when you have shaky hands. Then I thought I was going to be a gastroenterologist and open my own private practice. And then I decided hematology, because I was seeing the medical journals with all this progress. I'm a little bit more senior than my colleagues here, but this is a lesson for any field in the world. When I decided to go into myeloma, the therapy was not so good. It was melphalan and prednisone. So, and the only reason I went to myeloma is because I had good mentors. Dr. Phil Gripe, who's the late Dr. Gripe, he was a wonderful human being, and I was more interested in lymphoma, and he said, no, come and work with me in myeloma. That's why I ended up in myeloma. So I owe all of that to Dr. Gripe. In fact, I'm 1 year senior to Dr. Rash Kumar. Many of you know of him. And when Vincent was finishing his fellowship, I told him, no matter what you do, don't come to myeloma because there's no drugs here. You should go into leukemia. And somehow he decided to ignore my advice, and here we are.
Yeah, so I never wanted to be a Dr. Patel because my last name, everybody knows somebody else that's a Dr. Patel. And so I was going to go be a PhD. And when I was in elementary school, my third grade teacher, and she ended up being my fifth grade teacher, had breast cancer. And I think no one in my family did, but that seeing her every day, I think I just wanted to do cancer research for some reason. And then I'm a rebel. So I waited 20 years to get married. I have 4 dogs when my mom never let us have dogs growing up. And so when people tell me that something's not possible, I get drawn to it. So for myeloma, I was told it's not curable, right? So I said, okay, then how do we make that curable? And then for me in residency, it was patients are so different. Their clinical aspects are so different. Not everybody gets renal failure. Not everybody gets anemia. Not everybody gets bone disease, right? So it makes it pretty complicated. And that's a puzzle, and that's something that I said, okay, we got to figure this out, and that makes me want to come to work every day to make sure I treat everybody differently to what they have. And then the research part, as I said, people told me myeloma is not immunogenic, and I was like, okay, let's go. We'll figure this out. And my first day, so even though we don't wake up wanting to be myeloma doctors, my very first day of fellowship was actually with Dr. Orlowski, because I knew I was going to go into myeloma once I became a doctor. So then he's mentors me and everything, I think.
And can you share for everyone why you think the myeloma field, because I think even like 7 years ago, the Wall Street Journal said there's been more innovation in myeloma than in any other cancer. So why is that from your perspective?
All of I'm just joking. We're all great people that love this.
Just, how much work has gone into the field with the basic sciences, with immunology, biology. So everybody kind of synergizing, coming together, having us better understanding about the disease. We had an idea about the disease, and ideas have changed over a period of time. So it's been a process of evolution where we get to know more about the disease, we get, more research, and that has kind of opened all these options in front of us. So that would be my reason, why there's been so much growth in this field.
I think it's different for myeloma just because with solid tumors, we call them, where you have typical colon and lung cancer, breast cancer, and myeloma historically has been just drop the chemo bomb, right? Just kill everything in its way. And we have always had, it just took us a while to figure it out, although Dr. Patel knew, and we always had the immune system on our side because this is an immune system problem, right? So if we can harness our immune system and fix the glitch, perhaps, then we can have more tools at our disposal than maybe an organ and therapy for that organ may.
Yeah, and I think the people that were pioneers, right? Dr. Fonseca is amazing, but he's not that old to be a pioneer for myeloma, but his generation is really built on that. So we had, some amazing people. Why can't I remember Dr. Dury and Alexanian and Bob Kyle. Just amazing when they had nothing, right? And to be able to even get it to where we have. And then the next generation's really coming in and looking at it in different ways, and not just the disease, but the supportive care that you need with myeloma. I will say, compared to most other diseases or cancers, we have the most support therapies that we do for, again, bones, infections, all these things. And to have all that come together, for the rest of us then to start working on more detailed, it's been a wonderful journey, I think.
Okay, what other questions? Any other questions?
How far away are we from treating multiple myeloma when it's in the smoldering myeloma stage?
We're there. It's happening. It's happening already in clinical trial and some outside of clinical trial. They have some clinical trials that are already a decade old from Europe that were done that, in the American way, we don't think it was good enough. So we do our own here and try and prove that they were right or wrong. And so there has been studies that look to show that we can delay the inevitable. There's ongoing trials that are looking at different strategies to doing that, going big, go all transplant, go in, with guns blazing, or maybe just a little bit of Revlimid or a little bit of this. So there's lots of trials that are there. I'm sure all of us have a bias about it up here, and all of us are going to have an opinion. I'd say the ultimate answer to what to do with smoldering myeloma cannot be agreed upon by anybody that has a myeloma expertise quite yet. But the concept is can we destroy it in its earliest stages and cure it in its earliest stages so it never has the opportunity to grow to that. So we're here. Stay tuned.
Okay, well, one of the last questions I'll ask is, what do you think, what's the approach or strategy that will help us get to a myeloma cure? Is it trying to cure from the smoldering stage, from the standard risk stage? Is it top down from the high risk stage? Is it subgroups? Like you feel like, okay, we got this one subgroup cured, potentially. Is it that way?
Well, I think we're very close. So a few years ago, a colleague of mine, Dr. Mesa, who does myeloproliferative disorders, told me, you folks in the myeloma community are either a drug away or a combination away from curing a significant fraction of patients. And I think he was right, but more so in the combination. I think with all the tools we have right now, putting a winning team is going to be critically important. This is particularly important in the front line. So given all of what we have seen, and I have to say, not all the questions can be answered with individual clinical trials, but we can do a lot of conjecture and a lot of indirect inferences from what we're seeing in other data. To me, it's critically important to do the best you can during the first therapy. And I use this phrase of you have to finish the job, meaning you have to get patients into that MRD negativity. I think it's not far-fetched to imagine that there would be a future, maybe even without transplant, you go through frontline therapy, and maybe as you complete, you get either a CAR T or maybe you get some time on bispecific antibodies. And with that, we're going to be able to do that. But then lastly, you have to think about the addition of these drugs that come and help the specific biology. So maybe that's true for most myelomas, but if you're 11-14, you're going to get something like venetoclax or venetoclax. If you're 4-14, maybe this other drug that's now added to your combo. That's how children with acute leukemia was ultimately cured, which is over 90% cure right now. And I think that's what we need to do for myeloma. It's still a few years in the making and more clinical trials and perhaps even more drugs. But I think we're going to be able to put winning teams pretty soon.
Any other comments?
No, I think you did it nicely. And I think the
Yes,
answer to
very
your question was
nice.
subgroups. I mean,
Yeah.
I think no myeloma is the same. And we really need to understand where the lowest hanging fruit is, the ones that we feel like with these combinations that we have the best opportunity for to start there, and then figure out where our troubles are that we're not, being able to, put that across the board. But I think it's important to say that we have work to do, but we're getting close.
I think it's so impressive. From the time I was diagnosed in 2010, where the cure was never mentioned, you were kind of made fun of if you talked about curing myeloma, to today is so radically different. So I would like everybody to give a round of applause to these amazing physicians.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.